Really looking forward to introducing our next speaker, Sandeep Gupta, who is the Executive Vice President at Bharti Airtel. Sandeep, you're going to explain to us about moving from these monolithic architectures and waterfall methodologies to this agile infrastructures and continuous development, and really can't wait to hear, Sandeep, what you're doing at Bharti Airtel. So first and foremost, a big warm welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for inviting us and hosting us here. Thanks, Reddit, for inviting us to share our experience. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sandeep Gupta, and I'm heading the strategy and architecture for Airtel, looking at different aspects of the network, right from the devices to the radio network to the core, the cloud, and the edge networks, including the transformation of our networks towards more agile offerings to our B2B and B2C customers. So it's a pleasure to be here and to share our views on how we've seen our networks in the past few years move from monolithic architectures to the new agile ways of architecting the network and operating them and ensuring our agile services to the end customers. Let me just take this discussion by setting the context of where we are in the India market. And I think that will be very important to set context for what's exactly the requirement for TSPs and for OTTs to really have this agile network to be able to offer the right services. If I look back in the last few years, India has really evolved as a digital economy, as a digital country, a digital society, which is going to be the way forward for India going into future, as driven by our vision of our Prime Minister, who sees this country to become a 5 trillion economy from a 3 trillion economy. And why I'm mentioning that is that out of the 2 trillion the growth that we're expected in the next 3 to 4 years, 60% of it is going to come from digital services. And why this has become so common in India is because not only just the e-commerce or entertainment or engagement models coming on this mobile broadband network, but obviously because of all the processes and approach by the government and the enterprises to really make the whole lifestyle and economy digital in nature. Right, you call from identity, which is the Aadhaar, we call about the documentation, which is going digital with DigiLocker, the digital skill program, the digital health management, and the payment mechanisms. And I think this has all been enabled, if I may say, to give credit to the mobile broadband infrastructure in India, which has been the platform for enabling the digital economy and digital society. And why this has become so common is certainly that we see that mobile broadband now in India is being well affordable to the last, I would say, man on the street, to the last segment of the spectrum of the triangle that we have in the society. And that means a very large subscriber base with high data consumption, almost hitting about 20 GB per month per user. And that's been enabled because we are able to offer the lowest price per GB, almost, I would say, 1/10 to the global references compared to China, 1/4. So I think overall, I say that technology is always useful for really differentiating and leapfrogging in future. And this is what I think is certainly going to be important for the TSPs to really jump the curve and be ahead in terms of offering those digital services, agile services to the customers. And one thing I think we talked earlier, Thomas mentioned this, that this is going to be also be a change in the mind frame. And we've seen this in the past in our country. We have seen this in the past in the society, and we are seeing this in our operations in our own network. That moving from monolithic to digital native is all about the mind frame change, the process change, to make sure that we are able to move very smoothly and seamlessly into the technology and using the technology to make those transformational changes. Moving on, I would say that if you look at the network side of things, just to give you the context further on from a network of Airtel itself, if you look at the right side of the chart, it basically says that our voice 3 years back was primarily on circuit switch core. And it has moved directly to, I would say right now, 75% of our voice is on the 4G IMS core, which is the VoLTE core that is commonly called as. Why I'm mentioning that is that means there is a need of the networks to be flexible right from the the old age of technology or old age of services like circuit core to packet core to IMS core. That flexibility is required. And if you look at the left side of chart, it clearly gives you the idea that how the data has been exploding in India on our network itself. If you look at relative to the last 4 years, we see the growth of it already 40 times in this, or more than 40 times at this time from relative to 4 years back. And we already see this maybe moving 2 times or 3 times in the next 2 to 3 years time frame, or maybe even 2 years, if I may say, given the context that we are into. Which basically means that our networks, the TSPs have to be very, very careful about investing in technologies which are going to be future-proofing their investments and be able to let them serve with the right type of requirements coming from retail as well as the enterprise customers with their value chain or where their requirements are changing itself. So what I'll do is I'll give you a glimpse of where we have been in our journey over the last years and how do we see this in future for ourselves as TSPs as we are evolving and transforming our networks. If I again go back a few years back, we were in the monolithic architecture. If you talk about 5 to 6 years old earlier, this is where we were, and now we are at a place where we're almost in the era of being cloud native in our network architecture. But I think the journey has been that we've been moving the monolithic architecture, which has been on both radio and the core network, towards more software definable networks and software definable radios, which actually gave us a lot of advantage that I'm going to talk about. But then quickly moving towards more context of this discussion is virtualized core and then virtualized RAN, which Airtel is adopting for the first time in India market. We have already done those deployments and we're scaling them up as we speak. And then on the core network, we obviously moved from the virtualized core to a horizontal core with more automation and orchestration. That is very, very important to the point that was discussed earlier in terms of making sure that this is a seamless operations without increasing the cost of how you operate and deploy these networks. And then moving towards native cloud, where I'll give you some examples of why we believe this is important beyond the standard definitions of continuous improvement, continuous development, and readiness for network slicing. So I think this is super critical and very relevant topic today, that how the TSPs have moved and how we have moved from monolithic architectures to being native, cloud native, for making sure that we are able to have flexibility in the network and agility of services that I referred to. I think just taking maybe one more minute of talking about the initial phase of our definition in our network, which is more software-defined radios that we introduced a few years back, really gave us a huge advantage where last year itself, we have been able to transform and completely shut down our 3G networks, which is one of the biggest across the world with, I would say, at least in India, I can certainly say, with more than 100K sites being shut down on 3G and being brought to 4G network within a short span of time. And that was possible because we had the right type of infrastructure in terms of software-defined radios, single RAN, and that helped us to put maximum spectrum on 4G networks and give better experience to the end customers, making this 4G network ready for 5G. And as I said, that I'm going to talk about how we have been introducing and adopting the open vRAN architecture, which is going to make things more agile and flexible and be ready for edge compute as we speak today. I think going forward, as we said, that we could meet some of these aspects of capacity, coverage, latencies, and throughputs. But what's coming around us is certainly more requirements of having an agile network, a reliable network, and an elastic network. And I think we certainly have seen that this cannot be done with a monolithic approach or a monolithic architecture or monolithic infrastructure. This certainly needs more virtualization and automation for being able to offer these type of capabilities and services to the end customers. just talking about where we were a few, let's say 2 years back, we were more on the virtualization journey, but we saw that that virtualization journey was not complete. And this is where, since last, I would say, 18 months, we moved from vertical clouds towards horizontal cloud, built upon technologies, open stack technologies like being provided by Red Hat in this case. And this, I think, more importantly, we like to highlight that what this brings is different aspects that were never possible, maybe in monolithic or a virtualized infrastructure. We are able to actually do a lot of automation with this horizontal cloud, right from, I would say, day -1 to day 2, which is one of our questions that was put up right in the panel before, that how does this infrastructure, the open infrastructure or horizontal cloud, help us in terms of designing, deploying, and operating these networks? What is important and what we're doing is making sure that we have an end-to-end automation, right from catalog-based design studio, right to the or I would say single-click deployment that is reducing the deployment time from weeks to maybe just days or less than a day, depending upon the workload, and then having a zero-touch operations on that network. Again, I think this is all possible because you have all the right APIs and the controls and the orchestration of these infrastructure and the functions, so that really can manage and deploy this very, very effectively. Beyond this, obviously, it gives us flexibility to adopt the right hardware innovation. So we have innovations coming from our hardware partners like Intel in this example here, that we really can bring the innovation very seamlessly through this architecture, and working along with these platforms that are already validating and verifying the workloads, whether it is VNF or CNF on these open clouds or horizontal cloud, is where it gives the agility or bringing those workloads with minimum, I would say, forklift or minimum amount of movement from that particular validated platform to our own platform in our environment. So I think agility for life cycle management for the VNFs and CNFs comes with the ecosystem that is already making sure that we have those functions that were earlier monolithic are written in the VNF and CNF manner and tested on platforms that are enabled by the ecosystem. This is where we see that it's basically important to have an architecture to ensure that there is a future-proof readiness as we speak, moving from current 4G to 5G in India in maybe next few months or a year's time frame, depending on other aspects that we can talk about. But I think one more aspect that I see will be very relevant for being more cloud native and container-based architecture is this movement towards ORAN and vRAN architecture. And maybe I'll give you the context beyond the things that I mentioned on the slide, which are more important for this discussion of why cloud native is becoming super critical from an infrastructure architecture perspective. If you look at India market, the fiber penetration or the fiber connectivity to the sites is pretty low, which means that the operators typically would have to have the mid-haul type architecture, and they will not basically be able to leverage on the front-haul architectures, which basically means that your digital processing for the radio network has to be done at the edge, which means at the site itself. And then you can take the layer 2 or layer 3 functions to the aggregation data centers or aggregate at the edge, which is the aggregation. And then you can maybe take the RIC type of functions or the radio intelligence control and the central cloud, basically. But when you talk about building a virtualized platform at the cell site, you really need a very thin and a very agile infrastructure there, because you can't have a lot of data center type of capabilities. Otherwise, you'll be increasing your cost of deploying your radio network. Is where the container-based architecture with minimum infrastructure being deployed at the site is going to be super critical. And that's what we're working upon right now in terms of how do we make the digital processing for 4G and 5G thin at the cell site with this cloud native architecture, and then build upon more layers, which can be at the aggregation layer, and the intelligence in the backend, which is the central location. And then you basically get benefits of more ecosystem partners to work on. As I mentioned in SDR, we made the radios more software programmable, but what we are doing here is you're basically making the whole digital processing, breaking that off from a monolithic single partner solution to multi-partner solution where different services can be written off by different software stack providers. And even some of these services can actually be orchestrated outside of the sites in, as I said, to the RIC functions in a central location. And hence you actually can manage a multi-partner ecosystem with the flexibility of new applications on the radio network that were never imagined earlier through this type of virtualized and open RAN architecture. And this is really going to be important as we move towards bringing in more effective ways of deployment of 5G. I think as we were talking about, this is very, very important aspect that once you have the cloud network, which is either for the core network or for the radio network or even for your enterprise services, you really need to have the right type of visibility, in terms of the infrastructure that is being utilized, the inventory, the topology of the infrastructure, the ways the services or the infrastructure is being utilized, and orchestrate this at 3 different layers. What is the infrastructure layer orchestration, functional layer orchestration, and then service layer orchestration? I think that's very, very important, and we are already embarked upon this journey. As I said, this is more for day 2 type of automation, where we are working with orchestration partners and on Bano type of architecture to make sure that we are able to manage not only our the CNFs or the containers going forward, but even the existing virtualized functions that we have and the PNF, because the service stitching is very, very critical for making sure that we are able to have an offering that we can make to our customer or to our partner through this type of service stitching and assuring that service during the operation. So I think all of these aspects are very, very important for the operators to look at, and we are working on all of these dimensions to make sure that this is not just a cloud journey, but it's like a journey for transformation of the network and the services that we have. Talking about moving to the cloud native architecture, as I said, we are looking at both the radio network and the core networks moving from the VNFs to the CNFs, which is the cloud native functions, so that we are able to have better capabilities, or we are able to leverage capabilities like continuous improvement and development, rather than waiting for one major software upgrade from our partners to come at one time in a year or 2 times in a year. It's more like we have modules or microservices within the containers, and we will be able to change or modify or upgrade those containers depending upon the requirements and then enhancements coming from our solution providers. And importantly, I would say the capabilities to move towards the mobile edge computing, which is where the whole point about how we can have flexible deployments and agile deployments of these container functions, depending upon the enterprise requirements, be positioned across the network. So I think the ability to move a container from one location, from a centralized location, to the far edge, which is to the, let's say, the cell site, or even to the B2B customer location, is the flexibility that the CNS provide all of us to really leverage upon, and we make sure that we are able to have a very customized network, especially we're talking about slicing the network for different type of application and customers. We really can build this capability, and that's what is going to be super important for moving from the current ways of offering the services to the ways that the enterprises would look forward and are already looking forward for these services from us as TSP. I think overall, I would say finish it up with a statement that these architectures are only possible with right type of ecosystem partnership, like what I think Michael and Thomas mentioned earlier in the discussions. It's very important to have open standards, open platforms, open interfaces. We've seen this in the past with Android as an example in front of us, as how Android really proliferated and exploded the whole smartphone market, how 3GPP standards and O-RAN now is really making the radio network, which are all monolithic, opening that up so that we can have different ecosystem partners, and more relevant in this context of the OpenStack, OpenShift type of architectures, ONAP and Mano, which is really making the whole ecosystem come alive, making sure that we are able to leverage on this open ecosystem, open interfaces, and build the solution which is going to be best suited for a developer community to engage upon, our user community or our end customers to really leverage upon. So I think this is very, very important, and we realize that the benefit of all this is with an open ecosystem that really can make things agile leveraging the technology that we have. So I think with that, I'll finish up and give it back to you, Aaron, and happy to have any questions that the audience has.
Sandeep, thank you so much. That was such an interesting presentation. And I have a very quick question for you, because we are pressed for time. But you're talking about all the legacy you have. I mean, how did you get started, Sandeep? I mean, that is such a challenge, right? You've got some of the lowest data rates, so some low ARPU rates there. You've got lots and lots of legacy infrastructure. In India, you've had a huge disruptor come in. So Sandeep, I can imagine you all sat there with your hands, based in your hands, saying, "Where do you start?" But you've done well. So where did you start?
I think I would say we started in our minds, if I may say, in terms of saying that, yes, we need to transform and we need to be innovative. And then we took some baby steps. So I think it's very important for all of us to realize that these type of journeys are not going to happen in one day. We broke this whole thing, as I shared, into multiple steps. And we started taking one step at a time in a way, and making sure that we're ready for the next step. So if I were to say, as you give you example, the radio network was so important for us. So we started first with the radio network, because that's like 60% or 65% of our investments go in the radio network. But then we moved to the core network with all the virtualization and horizontal cloud and orchestration. I think these are the journeys that we have had, and we're still going through the journeys. I think we will be wrong to say that we've been able to accomplish everything, because the way we see is going forward with the virtualization of the radio network and the orchestration of the whole service network that we have is something that we're continuously working upon, and we'll make sure that we are ready for offering very unique services for our B2B and B2C customers with this type of innovation in our minds and with our people in our organization.
Sandeep, thank you so very much. I wish you had more time, but great presentation. Thank you.